In 1948, a factory worker's wife in Detroit could put a hot breakfast on the table for 6 people in 11 minutes, using nothing but flour, an egg, and a spoonful of the grease sitting in a coffee can on the back of the stove. Total cost 7 cents. Her grandchildren now spend $9 at a drive-through for something that comes in a paper wrapper and goes cold before they reach the parking lot exit. Number 19 on this list was eaten by every coal miner in West Virginia for 40 years, and a cardiologist at Duke University recently said it was a better source of sustained energy than any protein bar on the market. Number 6 was so common in the 1930s that school teachers could tell which families were poorest by the smell on their children's breath at 8 in the morning. And number 2 involved a technique so old that archaeologists found evidence of it in a colonial hearth in Virginia dated to 1619. These 25 breakfasts built this country. They kept fathers standing through double shifts and children running through schoolyards on full stomachs and pennies. Every single one of them vanished because a cereal company, a frozen food brand, or a fast food chain figured out it could sell you something worse for 10 times the price. Before we start, hit subscribe. What you are about to hear is the breakfast education that the food industry spent 70 years trying to erase. Let us count them down. Number 25. Fried salt pork and gravy. Before bacon became the standard, salt pork was the breakfast meat of working America. Sliced thin from the slab, soaked in water to pull some of the brine out, dredged in flour, and fried in its own rendered fat until the lean turned dark and the edges crisped. The drippings left in the pan became gravy with a spoonful of flour and a pour of milk. Salt pork cost about 12 cents a pound in 1951, half the price of bacon. A single slab lasted a family 2 weeks of breakfasts. Poured over biscuits or sopped up with bread, that gravy was the engine that started every morning in mill towns, mining camps, and tenant farms from Virginia to Texas. When supermarkets stopped stocking salt pork in the 1970s because the margins were too low, they did not just remove a product. They erased a morning ritual that had fed American families for 300 years. Number 24. Fried apples and biscuits. Appalachian mothers peeled and sliced whatever apples the cellar still held, fried them in butter or lard with brown sugar and a shake of cinnamon until they went soft and golden, and the kitchen smelled like a bakery that charged nothing for admission. Served alongside buttermilk biscuits still hot from the oven, fried apples were the breakfast that turned a Tuesday in February into something worth getting out of bed for. Apples stored in a cool root cellar lasted from October through March. The sugar cost almost nothing. The biscuits were already being made. The whole breakfast was essentially free if you had a tree in the yard. In Appalachia, everybody had a tree in the yard. When store-bought apple juice and applesauce replaced the root cellar, fried apples disappeared from the breakfast table. A fresh, warm, caramelized fruit dish was replaced by something cold from a jar. We called it convenience. The apples called it something else. Number 23. Fatback and cornbread. A slab of pure pork fat, no meat whatsoever, sliced and fried until the outside went crispy and the inside turned translucent. It was eaten alongside a wedge of cornbread left over from last night's supper. That was morning in the rural South for 100 years. Fatback cost almost nothing because it was the part of the hog nobody with money wanted. But fried until crispy, it delivered a crunch and a richness that bacon could not match. The cornbread soaked up the rendered fat on the plate and turned into something closer to a savory pastry than leftover bread. Children ate it with their hands. Fathers wrapped a piece in a rag and carried it to the field. When lean meat became the dietary ideal in the 1960s, fatback became a symbol of everything modern nutrition wanted to eliminate. It disappeared from breakfast tables and from grocery stores. The people who ate it lived hard lives, but they did not live hungry ones. Number 22. Oat porridge with buttermilk. Not oatmeal with milk and sugar. oats cooked thick in salted water, ladled into a bowl, and served with a pour of cold buttermilk alongside. You spooned the hot porridge, then sipped the cold buttermilk between bites. The contrast was the whole point. Hot and cold, creamy and tangy. Scottish and Irish immigrants brought this tradition to Appalachia and the Upper South, where it became the standard weekday breakfast on farms that kept a milk cow. The buttermilk was free, the leftover liquid from churning butter. The oats cost pennies. The combination provided protein, fat, and carbohydrates in a single bowl that kept a man plowing until noon without a second thought about food. When flavored instant oatmeal arrived in the 1970s, it replaced a tradition that had crossed an ocean and survived 2 centuries. A packet of maple-flavored sugar dust replaced a bowl that tasted like the Scottish Highlands at dawn. Number 21. Cornbread in sweet milk. Cold cornbread crumbled into a glass of cold sweet milk, eaten with a spoon, not buttermilk. Sweet milk is what families called regular whole milk to distinguish it from the soured kind. This was the summer breakfast across the entire rural South and Midwest. The meal you made when the kitchen was too hot to light the stove and nobody wanted anything warm. The cornbread was already baked. The milk was already cold. 30 seconds to assemble. 0 heat required. Children ate it on the porch steps in bare feet while the dew was still on the grass. It tasted like corn and cream and morning. A breakfast so simple it embarrassed people to admit they ate it, which is exactly why it disappeared. Nobody wanted to tell their city cousins that breakfast was cold bread in a glass of milk. But it was, and it was good, and it cost nothing. Number 20. Sorghum and butter on a biscuit. In the hill country of Tennessee, Kentucky, and Missouri, sorghum syrup was the sweetener that everybody could afford, because somebody in the county was always pressing cane and cooking syrup in the fall. A biscuit split open, a pat of butter, a heavy pour of sorghum so thick and dark it moved like cold honey. The flavor was deeper than maple syrup, almost smoky, with a bittersweet edge that made plain butter taste like caramel. A gallon of sorghum cost about 50 cents in 1952 and lasted a family the entire winter. Combined with homemade biscuits that cost almost nothing, this breakfast carried the hills south through mornings that would have been empty without it. When corn syrup and pancake syrup replaced sorghum on grocery shelves in the 1960s, the real thing became impossible to find outside of farmers' markets and country stores. A hand-pressed, wood-fired sweetener was replaced by a factory product dyed brown and flavored with chemicals. We paid more and got less. The usual arrangement. First pattern break. Here is what the cereal companies actually did. In 1955, the average American family spent about $4 a month on breakfast. Most of it went to flour, eggs, lard, and cornmeal. By 1975, the average family was spending $14 a month on breakfast, almost entirely on boxed cereal, frozen waffles, and toaster pastries. The food did not get better. The marketing got better. Kellogg's spent more on advertising in 1962 than the entire state of Mississippi spent on public education. General Mills hired child psychologists to design cereal boxes that made children beg in grocery store aisles. The target was not the child. The target was the mother. The message was always the same. A modern mother does not stand at a stove. A modern mother pours from a box. Within one generation, women who could make biscuits blindfolded were buying frozen ones in a bag because they had been convinced that their own skill was a burden rather than a gift. The biscuits in the bag cost more, tasted worse, and contained ingredients that their grandmothers would not have recognized as food. But they were modern, and modern won. Number 19. Pone, bread and coffee. Pone bread was cornmeal, water, salt, and a spoonful of lard mixed into a stiff dough. It was baked in a cast iron skillet or directly on the hearth if the family still cooked that way. No eggs, no milk, no sugar. The simplest bread you could make with the cheapest ingredients available. Coal miners in West Virginia and Kentucky ate a wedge of pone bread with black coffee every morning before descending into the shafts. The bread was dense and filling. The coffee was scalding and bitter. Together they provided enough fuel to swing a pickaxe for 4 hours before the first break. A week's worth of pone bread cost less than a dime to make. The miners' wives baked it the night before and wrapped it in cloth for morning. When the mines closed and the families scattered, pone bread went with them for exactly 1 generation. Their children made it because they remembered. Their grandchildren did not, because nobody thought to teach them. A bread that kept men alive underground is now unknown above it. Number 18. Fried mush with maple syrup. Fried mush. Cornmeal mush was cooked the night before, poured into a loaf pan and left overnight to set firm. In the morning it was sliced thick and fried in butter or lard until the outside formed a golden crust that crackled when you pressed a fork through it. The inside stayed soft and creamy. A drizzle of maple syrup over the top pooled in the cracks and turned dark where it hit the hot surface. This was the winter breakfast of New England, upstate New York, and the upper Midwest, where maple syrup came from the trees in the backyard and cost nothing but the labor of tapping and boiling. A family that tapped its own maples and grew its own corn had a breakfast that cost literally 0 money. When families left the farm, they left the maple trees and the corn patch behind. Fried mush and real maple syrup became fried nothing and fake syrup from a bottle, which is to say, it became something else entirely. Number 17. Streak o' lean and eggs. Streak o' lean was the fatty cut of salt-cured pork that fell somewhere between bacon and fatback, with just enough lean meat running through the fat to give it a name that distinguished it from pure lard on a plate. Sliced thin and fried until the lean darkened and the fat rendered clear, it was served alongside eggs fried in the drippings. A pound cost about 15 cents in 1953. 2 slices per person meant breakfast for a family of 6 cost less than a dime for the meat, and the eggs were coming from the hen house anyway. This was the breakfast of families who could not afford bacon and would not admit it. Streak o' lean was the quiet substitute, the almost bacon that tasted close enough to preserve dignity at the breakfast table. It disappeared when supermarkets stopped carrying it because the profit margins were too thin. A product that cost 15 cents a pound could not compete with one that cost $1.50. Number 16. Bread and coffee for dunking. A thick slice of day-old bread, sometimes buttered, sometimes plain, dunked into a cup of hot black coffee and eaten with one hand while the other held the cup. This was the 5-second breakfast of factory workers, cab drivers, and anyone who did not have time to sit down. The coffee softened the bread into something warm and easy to chew. The bread absorbed the bitter coffee and turned it sweet. Italian immigrants called a version of it caffè e pane and considered it perfectly normal. Scandinavian families dunked rye bread and called it breakfast without a second thought. By the 1960s, dunking bread in coffee had been replaced by donuts, which were just fried bread sold at 10 times the markup. The gesture survived. The economics did not. Number 15. Persimmon butter on toast. In southern Indiana, Kentucky, and the Ozarks, wild persimmons dropped from the trees every autumn after the first frost. Mothers collected them by the bucket, pushed the pulp through a sieve to remove the seeds, and cooked it down with sugar into a thick, dark butter that spread like jam and tasted like caramel mixed with dates. A jar of persimmon butter cost nothing but time and lasted the whole winter on the pantry shelf. Spread on toast or biscuits, it was a breakfast preserve that no store could sell because the fruit was too fragile and too regional to ship. When rural families moved to cities, the persimmon trees stayed behind. A breakfast condiment that had been gathered for free for generations was replaced by grape jelly from a factory that cost 30 cents a jar and tasted like sugar and nothing else. Number 14. Gravy and rice. In the low country of South Carolina and Georgia, and across Cajun Louisiana, breakfast was rice with gravy. Not fancy gravy. It was whatever drippings were left in the pan from last night's supper, thickened with a little flour and thinned with water, poured over a bowl of white rice. The rice absorbed the gravy and turned into a warm, savory porridge that was more filling than oatmeal and cheaper than anything on the modern breakfast menu. A 5-pound sack of rice cost about 30 cents in 1954 and lasted a family 2 weeks. The gravy was free because the pan was already dirty. This breakfast cost almost literally nothing. It was the morning meal of Gullah families, Creole families, and anyone in the Gulf South who understood that last night's supper and this morning's breakfast were connected by the same cast iron pan. Number 13. Sugar and bread. A slice of bread spread with butter and sprinkled with white sugar, folded in half and eaten like a sandwich. This was the after-school snack that quietly doubled as breakfast when there was nothing else in the house. Sugar cost 4 cents a pound in 1950. Bread cost 14 cents a loaf. A mother with nothing in the kitchen could still put something sweet in a child's hand before school. Some families added cinnamon when they had it. Most did not. The sugar crunched against the soft bread and the butter. Children who grew up eating it remember it as a treat. Decades later, some of them learned it was the only thing their mother could afford. She never told them. She handed it over and called it special. That was the breakfast, not the bread, not the sugar, the lie that made poverty taste like a reward. Second pattern break. Here is the math nobody talks about. A box of cereal in 1970 cost about 50 cents and contained 12 servings. A batch of homemade biscuits in the same year cost about 8 cents and produced 12 biscuits. The cereal required milk, which cost another 25 cents. The biscuits required nothing else. The cereal went stale in a week. The biscuit recipe lasted forever. A mother who made biscuits from scratch every morning spent about 15 minutes at the stove. A mother who poured cereal spent about 30 seconds. The food industry sold those 14.5 minutes as freedom. But they were not selling freedom. They were selling dependency. A woman who could make biscuits needed nothing but flour, fat, and a hot oven. A woman who poured cereal needed a grocery store, a brand, and a paycheck. The industry did not save her time. It took her skill and replaced it with a shopping list. Number 12. Fried cornmeal cakes with onion. Cornmeal, salt, boiling water, and a finely chopped raw onion mixed together, shaped into flat cakes, and fried in lard until the edges darkened and the onion turned sweet and golden inside the crispy crust. The onion gave the cakes a savory depth that plain cornmeal could never reach on its own. A single onion cost a penny. The cornmeal cost pennies more. This was the breakfast of families who had no eggs, no meat, and no syrup, but still managed to put something on the plate that a child would eat without complaint. The onion transformed the bland into the interesting. That transformation was the whole skill of poverty cooking, taking what you had and making it into something a person wanted rather than something a person endured. Number 11. Fried green tomatoes for breakfast. Before the movie and before the restaurant dish, green tomatoes were a breakfast food, sliced thick, dredged in cornmeal, and fried in bacon grease until the coating crackled and the tomato inside turned soft and tangy. Served alongside eggs or eaten on their own with salt, they were the late summer breakfast that used the tomatoes that would not ripen before frost. Every garden had them. Every mother knew what to do with them. The cornmeal crust provided crunch. The green tomato provided a sour brightness that cut through the fat and woke you up faster than coffee. A plate of fried green tomatoes cost nothing because the tomatoes were already growing and the cornmeal was already in the pantry. When backyard gardens gave way to suburban lawns, the supply of green tomatoes disappeared. You cannot fry what you do not grow. and we stopped growing. Number 10. Leftover beans on toast. A scoop of last night's pinto beans, reheated in their own liquor, spooned over a slice of toast. That was breakfast for millions of American families, and nobody considered it unusual until the cereal box arrived. The beans provided protein and fiber. The toast provided the base. The bean liquor soaked into the bread and turned it into something savory and filling. In the 1940s and 1950s, beans on toast was as common as eggs and bacon, especially in households where eggs were being saved for baking and bacon was too expensive for every day. British families ate it with baked beans from a can. American families ate it with whatever beans had been on the stove the night before. Pintos, navy beans, limas. It did not matter. They all worked. They all cost almost nothing. And they all disappeared from the breakfast table when someone decided that beans were not a morning food. Nobody voted on it. Nobody debated it. The rule just appeared, and an entire breakfast tradition vanished. Number 9. Streaker lean gravy over grits. The rendered fat from fried streaker lean turned into gravy the same way bacon drippings did, with flour and milk stirred into the hot pan. But the flavor was different, saltier, deeper, more porky. Poured over a bowl of slow-cooked grits, it turned the blandest grain in the pantry into something rich and satisfying. Grits cost about 10 cents a pound, and a pound lasted a family a week of breakfasts. The streaker lean was already bought for the meat. The gravy was free because the fat was already in the pan. This was the breakfast of the Cotton South, the Tobacco Belt, and the piney woods of Mississippi and Alabama. It held men through mornings of physical labor that would put a modern gym session to shame. When instant grits replaced stone ground in the 1970s, the texture changed and the tradition cracked. Instant grits could not hold gravy the same way. The gravy slid off instead of sinking in. The meal survived in name, but not in substance. Third pattern break. Here is what the food industry does not want you to understand. Every breakfast on this list was made from ingredients that cannot be branded. Cornmeal, flour, lard, eggs, milk, salt. There is no logo on a sack of cornmeal. There is no mascot on a jar of bacon grease. The profit margin on flour is so thin that grocery stores use it as a loss leader to get you into the building. The food industry cannot make money from a woman who feeds her family on ingredients that cost pennies and require no packaging, no refrigeration, and no advertising budget. So they replaced her. Not with better food, with more expensive food, wrapped in a story about convenience and modernity. Every dollar you spend on boxed cereal is a dollar that used to stay in the family budget. Every morning you pour from a box is a morning you used to spend at a stove, building a skill that no corporation could take from you. They did not improve breakfast, they monetized it, and we thanked them for it. Number 8. Egg broken up gravy on toast. A fried egg broken apart in the skillet and stirred into a quick gravy made from the pan drippings, a spoonful of flour, and a pour of milk, served over toast. The egg disappeared into the gravy, giving it richness and body and tiny curds of cooked yolk that studded every spoonful. This was the breakfast that mothers made when there was exactly 1 egg left and 4 mouths to feed. The gravy stretched that single egg across 4 plates. The toast caught every drop. A meal that should have served 1 somehow served 4, and nobody left the table hungry. That mathematics, making 1 egg feed a family, was the central skill of poverty cooking. It was not taught in schools. It was taught at the stove, mother to daughter, morning after morning, until the daughter could do it without thinking. Number 7. Crackling bread. When mothers rendered lard from pork fat, the crispy brown bits left behind in the pot were cracklings. Folded into cornbread batter and baked, they added salt, fat, crunch, and a deep, porky richness that made plain cornbread taste like a completely different food. Crackling bread was the breakfast side that cost nothing extra because the cracklings were a byproduct of a process that was already happening. You were making lard. The cracklings were free. Not using them would have been waste, and waste was the only sin that a 1950s farm kitchen recognized. The cracklings puffed slightly in the oven heat, leaving little air pockets in the bread that crunched and then melted on the tongue. When families stopped rendering their own lard in the 1960s, crackling bread died with the practice. No lard rendering meant no cracklings. No cracklings meant no crackling bread. A single change in the kitchen eliminated a breakfast that had existed since the colonial era. Number 6. Onion sandwich for breakfast. A thick slice of raw onion between two slices of bread with a smear of lard or butter and a shake of salt. That was breakfast for coal miners and railroad workers who needed something fast, cheap and calorie-dense before a shift that started before dawn. The raw onion was sharp enough to wake a man up without coffee. The bread was filling enough to hold him until the lunch whistle. A whole onion cost a penny. The bread cost nothing worth counting. The meal took 30 seconds to assemble and could be eaten with one hand while walking to the mine entrance. Children who carried onion sandwiches to school were teased for the smell, which lingered on their breath and in their lunch bags long after the sandwich was gone. Their mothers packed them anyway, because the alternative was packing nothing. Between an embarrassing breakfast and an empty stomach, the mothers chose the breakfast every time. That choice was its own kind of love. Number 5. Hoe cake and sorghum. Cornmeal mixed with boiling water and salt, shaped into flat cakes by hand, and fried on a greased skillet until the bottoms turned dark gold and the tops stayed pale and slightly soft. Named for the garden tool that field workers once used to cook them over open coals, hoe cakes were the oldest continuously made bread in American history. Served with sorghum syrup poured thick over the top. They were the breakfast of families who had a bag of cornmeal, a jar of sorghum, and nothing else. The boiling water partially cooked the cornmeal before it hit the pan, giving the cakes a texture that no wheat pancake could match, crispy outside and dense and almost creamy inside. When pancake mix arrived from a box, it replaced a technique that had been handed from generation to generation for 300 years. The box was easier, the box was faster, the box tasted like cardboard compared to a hot hoe cake swimming in sorghum. Number 4. Sardines and crackers. A tin of sardines pulled open with a key and eaten directly from the can, laid over saltine crackers, sometimes with a dash of hot sauce, sometimes with nothing at all. This was the breakfast of fishermen, dock workers, and anyone who needed protein and did not have time or money for eggs. A tin of sardines cost about 10 cents in 1953 and contained more omega-3 fatty acids, calcium, and vitamin D per ounce than almost any other food in the grocery store. The bones were soft enough to eat. The oil was rich enough to count as fat. 2 crackers and a tin of sardines was a complete breakfast for about 12 cents. Doctors now recommend sardines as a superfood. Nutritionists now recommend the omega-3 content for heart health. $50 supplement bottles now try to replicate what a 10-cent tin of fish provided every morning to men who never heard the word omega in their lives. Number 3. Cold biscuit and sausage from yesterday. A biscuit from yesterday's supper split open with a cold slice of sausage patty tucked inside. No reheating, no preparation. Eaten in the hand while walking out the door. This was the original breakfast sandwich, decades before any fast food chain claimed to invent it. The biscuit had dried slightly overnight, making it sturdier. The sausage had firmed up cold, making it easier to eat without dripping. The combination of cold bread and cold meat sounds unappetizing until you realize that the sausage fat had soaked into the biscuit overnight, seasoning it from the inside like a marinade. Mothers made extra biscuits at supper specifically so the men had something to grab on the way to the early shift. The planning was invisible, the intention was not. Number 2. Ash cake. Cornmeal, water and salt were mixed into a stiff dough, wrapped in damp cabbage leaves or corn husks, and buried directly in the hot ashes of the fireplace or wood stove. It was cooked for 20 minutes, then pulled out, unwrapped and brushed clean. The outside was slightly charred and smoky. The inside was dense and steaming, and it tasted like no oven-baked bread could, because the ashes imparted a mineral flavor that heat alone could not replicate. Ash cake predated the American Republic. Archaeologists found evidence of the technique in a colonial hearth in Virginia, dated to the early 1600s. Indigenous peoples taught it to settlers, who taught it to their children, who passed it through 10 generations of American mornings. When wood stoves gave way to gas and electric ranges, ash cake became physically impossible to make. The technology that replaced the fire also replaced the bread. A 400-year-old breakfast tradition was eliminated not by taste, not by cost, not by choice, but by the simple absence of ashes. Number 1. Whatever was left from supper. The most common breakfast in American history was not a recipe. It was last night's leftovers, reheated in a skillet or eaten cold at the kitchen table before the sun came up. Cold beans, cold cornbread, cold potatoes fried in grease, a piece of chicken left on the bone, whatever soup was still in the pot. Mothers did not call it breakfast. They called it what we have. For 200 years, the line between supper and breakfast did not exist in working-class American kitchens. You ate what was there. You ate what was left. You ate what your mother had managed to save from last night so that this morning would not start empty. The invention of breakfast as a separate meal with its own rules and its own products was a marketing achievement, not a cultural one. Cereal companies created the idea that morning required special food. Before them, morning required only that the kitchen was not empty, and the women who kept those kitchens made sure every single night that something was left on the stove for morning. That was the real breakfast tradition, not a recipe, a decision. A mother deciding before she went to bed that her family would eat tomorrow. Everything else was details. Try one this week, just one. Fry cornmeal mush in a skillet and drizzle sorghum over the top. Make a roux in bacon drippings and pour the gravy over a split biscuit. Crack an egg into a piece of bread with a hole cut in it and watch a child's face when you flip it. Tell me in the comments if your grandmother was wrong. Tell me which one your family still makes. Tell me where you are from. Because these were not just breakfasts. They were the mornings that built the people who built this country. They cost almost nothing, and they were better than anything in your freezer right now.